No, no.
We were just having a heated follow-on from this morning's conversation.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So it was a good conversation.
Conversation is good.
Yes, conversation.
And I do have just the slide advancer and the
Good, yes.
and your yeah.
Yay. I love this. Better be careful I don't slip it in my pocket. Maybe not yet.
Yeah, once I yeah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside. And continuing on with our theme week for this week, which is local food sourcing, we're fortunate to have Teresa Morgan joining us again today. And Teresa is an adjunct associate professor in plant biology at Ohio University and established the interdisciplinary food studies program at Ohio U in 2013. Her research focuses on sustainability implications of food choices and institutional procurement as a driver of regional economic development. And for this afternoon's session, Growing a Regional Food System, a case study of Ohio University and local producers. The presentation will discuss how institutional procurement can build resilient regional food systems. And I do ask you, please mute your cell phone ringers and help me in welcoming Teresa Morgan. Or Moran.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here this afternoon. I really am quite thrilled because when John first contacted me, he said, would you come and speak about institutional food procurement? Institutional food procurement is a topic near and dear, to my heart, but I know that it is, to many people, very dry and seemingly meaningless. So before your eyes glaze over and you make for the door, I just want to say that this issue actually connects to our food system in a very meaningful way. It connects to our role as citizens, American citizens, as Ohioans, and really as community members. So I hope to show you how those connections, how that web of networks is important and makes actually a word like procurement real and alive for us. So what the bottom line, usually we save it to the end, but I'd like to just give you a heads up because this topic, as I said, some people's eyes glaze over right away, is that the research indicates that we need to change our bottom line with procurement from pursuing the lowest cost to supporting and promoting our values through procurement in order to secure, sustain, and support a resilient, healthy food system. So before we get to talking about every aspect of this topic, we're going to, I'll just go through our agenda. We're going to talk with what is a food system? What are we talking about here? Then we're going to look at something that has a tremendous impact in our food system today, and that's consolidation in the food system. Consolidation being a fact of global food systems over really the history of our lifetimes, but over the past 30 years especially. We're going to look at institutional food procurement. What does that mean? Then we're going to jump into this case study about Ohio University, and then we'll look at a group that was formed, that I formed within Ohio University called the Farm to Ohio Working Group, which had as its mission to expand procurement of local food for the university. Then we'll take a look at lessons learned, and then we're going to discuss some sort of takeaways. So to get started, let's think about procurement in a different way. Procurement can be an instrument. I mean, procurement is just an accounting tool. It's just a process. And so we want to think about these processes to help us create positive change in our food system. So we need to shift the bottom line being, the lowest cost. We need to shift our mentality from the lowest cost to what we consider our values. And up here, this is a photo from a regional food hub in Morgan County called Chester Hill Produce Auction. They have prominently displayed global and local to show us where our food usually comes from and where our food could all be coming from. We're lucky we live in the state of Ohio. Oh, and full disclosure, I am a native born and raised Californian. Kind of rare. I'm from San Diego, California. All my life, I grew up seeing avocados, oranges, lemons, and of course, all of that is, townhouses now. But so I'm aware of the food system where our food, most of our food comes from, fruits and vegetables in the United States. And now I am able, I live in a different type of agricultural system in Athens, Ohio. We'll talk about that later. So what is a food system? Well, as we know, all a system is interconnected processes. And this is what's involved in getting the food to your store and then to your plate. And we can fill in at every step. This is an infographic from the United States Department of Agriculture. We can fill in at every step of the way other words to make this more real in our understanding of what a food system is. So for example, when we think of production, okay, we're talking about growing things. We're talking about raising animals. When we talk about processing, well, we're talking about harvesting, and we're talking about slaughtering. Then we're talking also about packaging in this processing. Aggregation and distribution, we're talking also about storage of food. There's a great new book about food storage and refrigeration in the history of the industrialized world, and it's a fascinating look on how we store our food to prolong the life of that food product. So with aggregation and distribution, we're thinking about storage. We're thinking about transportation. Now, we've really got to keep this in our mind here, because if our food's coming from California, aside from questions of water usage, soil usage, we have questions of environmental impact. We have questions of the development of the road system. We have questions about labor and the length of time it takes to drive. We have the questions of refrigerated trucks. So this distribution angle is extremely important. And then we come to markets and consumers. And I want to say that we're missing out a little step here. With markets, let's also remember marketing. Let's also remember advertising, because that's the way a lot of consumers get their information about our food supply. So when we come to markets and consumers, there's a very important icon that's absent from this list, and that's the icon of waste disposal and food waste disposal, which is becoming increasingly significant impact in our food system, because now in 2023, 24, in the 2020s, food waste, and that is what we call post-harvest. So after the harvest waste in our food system in the United States of America is how much in a percentage? 20 is a good number. I want a higher number. 30 is a good number. I want a higher number. 30 to 40% is the estimate in food waste in the United States. That's at the retail and at the consumer level, post-harvest. So remember, there's also a tremendous impact on harvesting, because if what's harvested does not meet the specifications, you probably all have heard about ugly fruit, and there's lots of places where you can purchase ugly fruit that does not meet the specifications that the market wants. For example, an apple that may have a couple little nibbles in it, or an ear of corn that maybe's got a worm at the top. And I always look for that worm because then I know it wasn't doused with pesticides. So but that is not market ready. And so ugly fruits and vegetables are, of course, tossed post-harvest. And then we come to our own refrigerators. Refrigeration is a wonderful thing. What has refrigerators led us to but increased food waste, because we do not keep a mental image of what we have in our refrigerator. I know at the back of my vegetable bin, I've got some carrots that have been in there a while. Now, 100 years ago, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, they would have known every single carrot that they had and used that carrot. I got lazy. It's in the bin. Where does it go? We have started to compost in my family, and we don't know what to do with our compost. We've got so much compost. But if it weren't composted, it would go straight into the trash. And that accounts to 30 to 40% of our food system in the United States of America. And if you think of that, that's a waste of water. It's a waste of soil nutrients. It is a waste of pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. So the soil is being treated with these insecticides, herbicides, pesticides to produce something that we throw away. So we want to keep that in our mind as we go through our food system. It's also a fun fact to know that globally more than 1 billion people work in the food system. And in the United States, 34% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the food system. Now, when we think about the food system, when we go to a grocery store, and this has always been a great visual image of the United States, when you go to an American supermarket, you are inundated with choice. So if you investigate that choice, you will see that really it's not a lot of choice, because the same companies are making the same products. It's just they're marketed and branded in slightly different ways. So really, we have the illusion of choice in our food system because of this amazing concept of consolidation. And so, consolidation, making things solid, that doesn't sound so bad. But really, what consolidation means, and it's also supposed to make things more effective and more coherent, consolidation, that sounds good. But here's the impact on the food system. Does everybody appreciate this? I know it's a lot to see, but I just sometimes think, oh my gosh, there's a difference. All the cat foods. What am I going to feed my cat? Wonderful cat. Really, they're all the same. They're just in a different package, at a different price point, at a different placement on the shelf. Or my dog food, truly wonderful dog, it's the same thing. Well, why do I have, when I stand in front and I'm trying to remember what does he prefer? Does he prefer the salmon and rice or prefer the sweet potato and duck? What does he prefer? I should just remind myself, it's all the same. And then when we come to cereals, children's cereals, the colorants are different, but the actual ingredients and the extrusion process, extrusion is the amazing machinery, the industrial process that spits out the dough or the paste into different shapes. But if you look at the actual ingredients, aside from colorings, you will find the same stabling agents, bulking agents, the same preservatives, and the same types of sugar. And yet, we stand in front of the cereal aisle and are overwhelmed with, quote unquote, the choice. But that's what a chart like this can help us understand. So let's go to consolidation as what does it mean for us as consumers? So I've got some facts here. Whoa. The beef market in the United States of America, we are renowned throughout the world for having, we are not the largest consumers of beef per capita, but we are one of the greatest consumers of beef in the world, and our beef is renowned for its high quality and for accessibility in the United States. And yet, 85% of the beef market is controlled by only 4 firms. What's so odd is you're going to see 4, 4, and 4 here, but they're not the same 4 firms. So with beef, we've got Cargill, we've got and Tyson, and we've got JSB. JSB is a Brazilian company. It is on track to be the largest beef producer in the world. Soybeans, we've got 82% of soybeans and soybean processing controlled by 4 firms, and that's, again, Cargill. So we got Cargill. Then we got Archer Daniel Midlands. These names will be, I'm sure, familiar to you. And then we've got Bunge, and then we've got Corteva. And Corteva in soybeans is a very interesting phenomena because Corteva was, or it's an offshoot of DuPont. So we've got these interesting sleight of hands with a lot of our multinational food corporations, food and chemical and seed and pesticides. For example, we all maybe remember Monsanto. Oh, Monsanto was the bad guy. Monsanto was horrible. Monsanto not only was responsible for Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, but Monsanto was also very instrumental in, and still is under a different name that we'll just come to, in genetically modified corn and genetically modified soybeans. So Monsanto was bought out by a German company called Bayer aspirin. So now, Monsanto doesn't exist, but Bayer exists. And Bayer has assumed Monsanto's product line. So we have to really be careful when we're looking at where our food comes from, because it's actually a labyrinth of where our food comes from. And the deeper and deeper you go into that labyrinth, you find out there's only 3 or 4 players. And I'm talking about 3 or 4 players worldwide. And we all remember the recent horrible situation with infant formula in this country. Absolutely terrifying level of bacterial infestation in infant formula production in the United States, and there are only 4 producers of infant formula. That's Abbott, Perrigo, Nestle, and Mead Johnson. So we have this amazing concentration in our infant formula sector of the food industry, in our soybean sector, in our beef market, in our chicken market. Also, I always think about dairies because I'm from Athens and we have a wonderful dairy nearby in the county, and it's called Snowville Dairy, and you can go out and you can see the cows, and they're living their best life. They're actual cows eating grass. They're grass-fed, and they walk around, and you can go and see them walk, and then they go to this really big milking shed, and you're like, oh, you know, and you feel like you're transported into a story time picture of dairies. And it was that up until the 1990s, 1995s, dairies in the United States were generally under 500 cows, which still conforms to our kind of idea of a dairy. But those cows did not go out and consume grass. Those cows live their life in a stall, and they're fed, and their wastes are spread out and shipped out to waste lagoons. But now, in the past 20 years, we have what are called mega dairies. And mega dairies, you might have about 6, 7, 8 months ago read about the mega dairy fire in Texas. I see some people nodding. So how many cows are in a mega dairy? And what are cows doing in Texas? That's another thing. How many cows are in a mega dairy? 20 to 30,000 cows. Oh yes, look it up. You can, unfortunately, I hate telling this because I've had students say to me that it's a trigger warning. The mega corporation that burned in Texas was there was film of it, and unfortunately, you know, you can hear mammals dying. So it is a gruesome, gruesome, gruesome fact. Mega dairies exist now in inland California, in Texas, and in Arizona. They are fed on alfalfa. Alfalfa, of course, being the most thirsty grass in the entire world. They are not what we think of Michigan dairies and Ohio and Vermont with the cows out there living their best lives. But we have to think that this is the result of consolidation. So again, consolidation is, in theory, we have another bad word for consolidation, and that's called, begins with an M and it ends with a Y. Monopoly, yes, bingo. That's another nasty word for consolidation. But unfortunately, in the food sector, it isn't used that much, except now it's coming up with the United States regulators because Kroger and Albertson want to merge. Do you have Albertson up here? No. Albertson's mostly on the West Coast. It's just about the biggest supermarket chain on the West Coast. But you have Kroger. And so Kroger merging with Albertson, they're trying to do this to compete with the big boy. The big boy is the nation's larger purveyor of groceries, which is, of course, Walmart. So, but right now, the federal regulators are investigating this merger because they're afraid that it will mean store closures, job losses, and higher prices. That's the result of consolidation. But we don't have that much discussion of consolidation currently in other elements of the food sector. It did during COVID. There was discussion, especially in the meat industry, because there was so much impact of COVID on meat processing. And finally, people thought, all of my beef in this country, where 3/4 of beef is coming from 4 plants in Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota. How did that ever happen? It's consolidation. And what happens through consolidation is that regional slaughterhouses have closed. So animal husbandry, people who are raising the animals for slaughter, they don't have a choice. They have to go to the facility that will handle their animal. You may remember during COVID, mass slaughter of pigs because the pigs were growing too big to be slaughtered by the handful of pig processing facilities. So the animals were killed, nothing was done with them, they were pushed into the waste lagoon, and that was it. Talk about a waste of, there's an ethical issue, there's a moral issue, and then there's simply the waste of resources. But this is why we want to think about consolidation, and why consolidation, which could be a good thing in some areas, is maybe not so good and needs some more regulation when it comes to food, because customers can pay more and have less choice. There's also a potential for lower safety standards, and there is always a prioritizing of efficiency, which may mean that animal welfare standards are put by the side. Also, with consolidation comes extremely powerful lobbying. We had a question earlier this morning about food lobbying, and the food lobby industry, the food industry lobbying is larger than the defense industry lobbying, and it can influence and does influence food policies and regulations favoring, no surprise, big business over the consumer. In the 2020 election cycle, food companies spent over $200 million in political contributions. So, oh, and I meant to also say, if you have questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to ask. Whoops, sorry. Okay, so as I said, these are the impact on us, the consumer. Pay more, less choice, lower safety standards, environmental concerns, especially you may remember with the mega storms in North Carolina a few years ago, one of the unanticipated consequences of the storm surges was waste lagoons. They were hog waste lagoons because North Carolina is one of the biggest pork producers in the United States. Waste lagoons overflowed and contaminated wide sections of the counties in which they were located. So environmental concerns, efficiency over animal welfare. Why do you have 20,000 cows together, up to 30,000 cows together? Because you can operate at more efficiency, with greater efficiency. It's much better, more efficient to keep the animals in the stall, press a button, their food drops, press a button, the waste is run out, and press a button and they're milked. That's a lot more efficient than my idyllic Athens County dairy where they walk around and then follow the leader into the milking shed. But there's a cost to efficiency. And then also lobbying influence favors big business over consumers. So what has all this got to do with our topic of procurement? Well, let's think about what is procurement. So procurement is the sourcing, we're talking about institutional procurement, just to be clear. It's the sourcing, negotiating, contracting, and purchasing. Probably everyone has somebody in their family that works in some kind of procurement office at a school district or someplace, a hospital. That's what the process of procurement is, and we're looking at procurement in what's called institutional channels. So I'm talking about K through 12 school districts, university, food banks. Here's a food bank with USDA food there. correctional facilities, and hospital systems. These are the main players in institutional procurement. Now, in institutional procurement, as in most areas of procurement processes, the aim of the procurement process is to obtain the lowest price. Nowadays, there are some procurement processes that include factors to weigh things like energy efficiency and sustainability criteria. So there are, in some procurement processes, this additional language that asks the institution, have you looked at their energy efficiency? Have you looked at the sustainability characteristics of this company and this product? But they're not throughout institutional procurement. So let's take a minute and step back and look at the, okay, to look at the federal government. So the federal government last year bought, this is the USDA and the DOD. So, whoops, excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the USDA and the DOD, that's the Department of Defense, they account for over 90% of the direct food purchases. Now, the USDA buys commodity foods for school districts, food banks, low-income seniors, foreign aid, and for Native American reservations. The DOD, of course, the Department of Defense, purchases food for US troop support and military bases. This, when I'm talking about institutional food procurement, this does not include the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, nor does it include WIC, which are federal monies channeled to an individual to make their own individual food choices. I'm talking about the United States as a whole purchasing food. Now, the majority of the United States federal food contracts they're not spread out across vendors in the United States. For example, Tyson Foods got 43% of all beef purchases for the USDA, one corporation. So we ask ourselves, this one-stop shop, lowest price-driven shopping with Tyson, does that align with the values that the USDA says it wants to promote throughout our food system? And this is the statement, the value statement of the Food System Transformation Framework of the United States Department of Agriculture. This is a post-COVID statement of a new framework that we should be implementing to create a food system that maybe won't let us down in the next pandemic like the last one did. So we have to build a more resilient food supply chain. And the aim of that is to give us better and more market options for consumers while reducing carbon pollution. Create a fairer food system that combats, and this is their language, that combats market domination and helps producers and customers gain more power in the marketplace by creating new, more, and better local market options. Make nutritious food more accessible and affordable for consumers. That's a statement that the USDA is trying to promote. Emphasize equity by creating, I love this, more economic opportunities for communities to allow them to retain more of their food system dollars. We don't always think about our food system dollars, But when you go to the supermarket, you spend money, and where does that money go? Does it stay in your community? Some of it does, maybe with workers in that particular supermarket. But the majority of the money that you spend is leaving your community. You are not participating in a building process for your community. So the aim of the USDA and its transformation framework is find a way to keep the food dollars in the community. So when you have this as kind of a framework, you kind of ask yourself, well, okay, what's happening on this front here? And so we do have research that supports this kind of framework. This is research funded by the Federal Reserve. Oh my God, the gold standard in the United States for economic research, the Federal Reserve. What has the Federal Reserve found? The Federal Reserve found that there needs to be legislative efforts. Senate legislative efforts were suggested. And guess what? Last year, Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, he submitted a bill. It's called Effective, capital E, F-F-E-C-T-I-V-E, Effective Food Procurement legislation to change the federal food system procurement to create a pilot program that would help the USDA funnel money to smaller producers and to move procurement criteria, not from cost, but to values. And the values being carbon reduction, worker well-being, resilient supply chains, and equity. Also, Fetterman's bill has in it money to help small producers and socially disadvantaged producers who are unable to access standard loans for equipment in order to let them get a toehold in the marketplace. And also, his bill contains money to further research on moving our food system from a national system to a regional connected system in order to provide more food security. This legislative effort also focused on climate mitigation strategies to be in line with the presidential's bill with regard to climate action. I guess it's not much of a surprise to tell you that nothing much has happened since 2023 with John Fetterman's bill. But returning to the Federal Reserve research, this research supports the fact that K through 12 purchasing, university purchasing, hospital purchasing, prisons are where there can be purchasing power to strengthen a regional food system that will help create greater food security within that region. So there's actual documented research that this is a way that procurement becomes an instrument for strength and building communities, and not just for simply the cheapest price moves the product. So we can see that there has been some interest at the federal level to move away from contracts that are just on the lowest bid, and that there's plenty of research every day, and there's a growing awareness that the lowest price is not the best value, and you have to ask, what bang am I getting for my buck? So when you think about this at the federal level, this federal research, I want to move to look at something closer to home. I want to look at Ohio University. So let's turn to our state here in Ohio University, and we can look at how procurement was seen as an instrument that could be for change. So we want to first know that throughout the United States right now, higher education is in turmoil. I think we all know that. There are many reasons for that. Rising costs. Many suggest that there are poor linkages between the educational system and the labor market needs. But there is a growing concern with how higher education is responding to its mission of preparing the next generation. So one of the ideas that food procurement in an institution can address is it can address this question of sustainability. So what do we mean by that? We mean trustees, students, faculty who want lower food miles and want the university to demonstrate that it's shortening the food miles of its products and that it's lessening its campus dining carbon footprint. Health impacts. There's a great concern about the health, the physical health of our young college-age people. There's rising amount of research on the impact of ultra-processed food, and having a regionally sourced, fresher meal on campus would demonstrate that that campus is interested in the physical health of its student body. And then this feeds into the next issue of recruitment and retention. I don't know if many of you have been on a college tour, taken a young person on a tour of campuses to see where they might want to go to college. But if you made a tour within the past 4 or 5 years and went in a campus dining hall, you would probably see a blackboard or whiteboard at the front of the hall that lists where the products in the dining hall comes from. So if you go to Denison, you can see this. If you go to Kenyon, you can see this. If you go to Michigan State has a fantastic program where you can check where your food comes from. This issue, if you go to Ohio University, you can see in some parts, some dining halls, information about that. But this issue of where does my food dollar at university go and what is my child getting to eat is now seen as both a recruitment tool and a retention tool. So on the campus tour, when the parents and grandparents go in and see, oh, beef that's feeding beef and pork and eggs and milk. If you go to Oberlin, they're coming within 150 miles of the campus. And that's seen as a way to recruit students and also to retain them with the quality of food. Regional economic development is also a key point of this shift in procurement. If Tyson's supplying all the chicken, and we have chicken producers right here in the state of Ohio, so maybe we should think about how far away that chicken's coming, and maybe the marginal price differential for the chicken that comes from a nearby place, that maybe the chicken takes some other characteristics, that maybe the chicken has a little larger space than 12 inches by 18. Maybe we could add that into the bidding language to consider with procurement. So that money would stay in the state of Ohio or in the community where that chicken producer was located. So this concept of economic development also aligns with the land grant university system. Now, Ohio University is not a land grant. To be clear, Ohio University tried to become the land grant institution back in the 1860s and 1890s, but it failed. But land grant universities have a responsibility to engage with their communities, and in their charter, they're supposed to improve the lives of people in their region. So here's a simple way where they can be fulfilling their mission by using the instrumentation of dollars, purchasing, to improve the lives of people in their region. And then community resilience. When people talk about resilience in the food system, what they mean is fewer disruptions in the supply system. So let's say, I mean, this is a horrible thing to think about. Let's say there's a major earthquake in the state of California, or maybe not even thinking of that. Let's think about the drought, the ongoing drought in the state of California, and that effect on the supply of broccoli and onions. Let's take something that we grow here. In Ohio, we grow onions, we grow broccoli. Well, are we ready to step up and supply those places that used to be having the broccoli and onions coming 3,000 miles? Are we ready? Here's a market opportunity. Let's supply the market that wants broccoli with broccoli that's grown within 100, 200, 250 miles instead of a 3,000-mile trip in a refrigerated truck. So that's the question of resiliency. You see this word resilient appearing and reappearing and reappearing, and that's because the COVID disruptions in our food supply really created an amazing shockwave through the system. In fact, many people thought that following COVID, there would be a change because the shock waves were so profound. Unfortunately, our memory, not so good on what happened during COVID. And so the much vaulted, oh, things will change after COVID in the food system, has really not come to pass. So here's an opportunity to try to address those things if we think back about the COVID time and the impact of our food system. So just want to make sure that when I'm talking about Ohio University and this story of procurement, that I'm not talking about something with rose-colored glasses. This is not a situation with rose-colored glasses. This story of procurement at Ohio University really reveals the tension between a mission-driven institution, a public university's academic objectives, and the campus dining services, which have profit-driven motivation. So that's really what procurement is, this issue of regional procurement. Are you using this to further the profit-driven objective of the organization or system? Or are you using it to align with the objectives, the ethical values, the statement of purpose of that institution? So that's what we really come to have to ask ourselves when we're thinking about procurement. So this case study does show how there needs to be significant change in state-level procurement processes. Just reminding everybody, Ohio University is a state school, so it is bound by state law. It also shows, this example will show how campus champions, you gotta have somebody in the institution who believes in this, along with students, so you have to have a top-down, bottom-up strategy if you want to create any change in an institution. This is not rocket science. We know this in institutions, regardless of what kind of change. You need the top down and you need the bottom up to create a lasting change. So what I did is that in my role as Director of Food Studies, which was an interdisciplinary program to examine food through the lens of just about every department you can think of: history, linguistics, chemistry, environmental sciences. And that program was interdisciplinary, and so students would take a number of different courses and look at food from the sociological perspective, or from a perspective of religion or classical world. And in that got me thinking about, well, what are we doing about food on campus? And students themselves asked, well, okay, we're studying about food, so when I go to the dining hall, what am I gonna get? What am I getting? So I founded a group through, I received a grant from the Sugar Bush Foundation. That grant enabled me to start what was called the Farm to Ohio Working Group, and that included, I led the group, and it was senior staff, senior university